general overview of City of Tucson, and floodplain management. We're gonna go over some highlighted subtask presentations. And then instead of doing the goal, the hazard assessment and action items, we're only gonna concentrate on the goal this meeting. And then we're gonna do hazard assessment February, action items in April. And we're gonna discuss the subtask options that we've been discussing in previous meetings. And then you can sign up if you wish to on those working groups, and we're gonna pick some dates. So the City of Tucson has a floodplain management plan. It provides us with some CRS, community rating system points from the NFIP program. We actually already have the City of Tucson's Tucson Stormwater Management Study from the 80s and 90s. And so the floodplain management plan is phase 5 of our master plan, since we already had a master plan in place. So we created the FMP based on the requirements of what FEMA asked for. And we do these 5-year updates as part of that requirement, as part of our responsibility to keep up to date. So we convene in our meetings with the stakeholders. Of course, people retire or move along, so sometimes there's changes in those participants. We're fortunate to have some of you that have been in the FMP from the start, and we appreciate your input and your participation. And then we review all of our floodplain management actions, and we see where we're at based on those action item lists. And then we also look at our goal and update it if necessary. And we also review our hazards that are that we have identified as being flood and erosion hazards within the City of Tucson. And we look and assess them to how we can address those issues. And we include that in our update. And then we also look at the overall list of action items, and we identify those that we've completed or that are ongoing, and we update that. The Floodplain Administration has worked on the action item list, and because we've got a very ambitious agenda today, we're going to skip that item and just concentrate on our goal, discussing that to see if we want to keep the goal or if there's something else we need to subtract from it or add to change it. We're also going to talk about a specific list of action items, and we're going to eventually have the mayor and council consideration sent to mayor and council for consideration for adopting this update for the floodplain management plan 5-year. We had in 2016, as Claire stated, that was paid for by FEMA, and we had a consultant, FEMA consultant, help us with our 2016 FMP. Don and Claire and Laura were involved with that one. And then in 2020 we had another 5-year update, and it also included a floodplain ordinance update. We anticipate there may be also some slight revisions to our floodplain ordinance, because every couple of years there's always something that we would like to clarify or update. There were some previous meetings over the last couple years with stakeholder groups. The floodplain management stakeholder, some of the stakeholders, and it was identified that we needed to modernize some aspects of our drainage management. And although rainwater is still running downhill, our equations are the same pretty much. You know, you've got sort of an empirical approach when it comes to civil engineering. Software isn't like that. And so, you know, as a civil engineer, we're constantly learning new things, but the main concepts of civil engineering pretty much stay the same. And so we believe that the drainage manual is still intact, but it just needs to be modernized. We're looking at changing the way we use the drainage manual by putting it online and putting like the city's flow peak estimator on the computer, so you can input data onto the computer straight away and get a downloaded file or print it out. And those types of things that we're looking at updating. And so modernizing the drainage manual is one of our subtask working groups that we're gonna have available for you guys to sign up to be involved with these subtasks. We're also looking at improving how we have submittals coming in, having more consistency, more accuracy in the submittal modeling and data by defining modeling parameters. This is another aspect of modernization for our the city of Tucson, how consultants will be submitting their H&H models, and we're gonna help define what those parameters are. Some of our subtasks will be more of a identifying what we want to see. Like, for instance, the modernization of the drainage manual likely will be kind of like an outline of what we want to see. And then that outline will be given to this a city consultant to help get that developed. The modeling parameters, we anticipate that might be something that the working group can define, and then the city staff will develop some guidelines based on those recommendations from the FMP stakeholder working group. We also have a few other stakeholder groups, and so if you've noticed, we have a little bit of a heavy load on the stakeholder folks that are participating here. A lot of the local drainage engineers have been invited to this meeting for those specific two stakeholder working group subtasks. So that's why it seems like there's a lot of engineers in the meeting for this FMP. Plus, I like to see all you guys. So outreach is part of an important aspect of what we do for the city of Tucson floodplain management. And a lot of our action items from our previous FMP identified certain information that we wanted to share with the public. And there was an opportunity for us to get some extra points with a new CRS action item. And that activity is called the flood insurance meetings. And those include the state and some local jurisdictions participating in providing a large overview and information on flood safety and information. That's some of the information that we did last year. And so that's an example of how the city of Tucson is working on their action items. That was outreach activity. And then we're gonna briefly go over the unhoused and water courses and talk about stormwater safety. This is a very serious issue for the city of Tucson. I'm going to skip I had a presentation from TPD, and it's got some video of some of the culverts on fire. You know, there's a lot of fires that the encampments we're seeing in these in our box culverts. And so I'm just going to quickly go through this. We do have a lot to cover. So we have various types of aspects of safety. Of course, the homeless are at risk, especially if they're high on drugs. Then they're more prone to not be aware of their surroundings and a flash flood condition. So especially in Tucson with our flashy storms, this creates a huge safety risk for the homeless there. You know, we've got a problem with that issue with them dying in our storm drain systems. There's, of course, stormwater quality aspects, but we're going to concentrate on, you know, the fact that we've got a lot of, you know, besides the stormwater quality, there's obstructions, which are extreme risk to the neighboring properties and infrastructure, et cetera. So you've got a risk to the general public and to the homeless. We have a problem with sometimes the homeless are tapping into water lines. This can create a contamination point in the line, which is a serious problem. We also have just one section of our water course where even the carving out of stairs, which is frequently seen, the homeless will cut in a staircase or do terracing on a slope. And hydraulically, that changes the dynamics of the flow and causes localized scour conditions, which then increases the erosion risk. In one section, we have over $1 million in damage just in a short little stretch of one of our floodplain. And we have some buildings that were non-conforming that sat within the erosion as setback, now at risk of falling into that water course. So I don't have $1.5 million to fix that, but these are some of the issues that are coming up from a floodplain management standpoint, aside from the risk to life for the homeless being in our floodplain areas. So we've got just a variety of different conditions. One thing that's interesting is that in 2014, we found that homeless started increasing. The activity was, you know, generally increasing. And in 2014, we saw the rise. And I think that was during meth or a heroin issue at that point, I forget. And what was interesting was that the meth users actually are, I would say, more risk, creating more risk to our storm drain system, because it appeared that the meth users were packing in a lot of stuff into the box culverts and making it tighter and more apt to be a blockage and obstruction rather than non-meth users, which are just, maybe a tent or something, and trash, but it blows out the other side and doesn't obstruct as badly. So I would say there's a good thing that's happened that fentanyl came along, and now we have less meth users creating this impacted culvert scenario. I'm not trying to lessen the impact of fentanyl on the society. It's a very serious problem, but from a floodplain management standpoint, that technical aspect should be noted. We're going to have a sign-up sheet for one of our stakeholder subtask working group is going to be looking at human access controls. Developed a list of about 20 different aspects of ways to restrict human access into culvert or storm drain areas to lessen that risk of them entering in to those storm drains and causing a risk to life or property. So that's going to be one of our stakeholder. We have another presentation here. Ron from Wilson is going to be presenting our next presentation, and this is going to be talking about establishing those parameters for software submittals so that we have better consistency.
My bad, guys.
I don't know. I think that
You want a
was,
team call?
that was,
Yeah.
we're recording.
Okay.
You know what, I think it's
Press the space bar
this,
or down?
yeah.
Down. Okay.
Um,
And back up. Okay.
Yeah, and you had some interactive aspects,
Yeah, some videos.
so do you want me to bring up that instead of this?
I had 5. So I think the.
Or do you want to do a PDF?
Make it full screen. Yes, just make it full screen. Oh, no. So I can see where that's the first. Yeah. Yeah, I think it'll come out. I hate it, but you have to do it. Hybrid. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Ron Copeland. I work for Wilson and Company. I'm a civil engineer there, doing mostly stormwater. I've been doing 2D modeling for my whole career, basically. Pleased to talk to you this morning about kind of like the 2 major softwares that we use in Arizona, which are Flow2D, which is kind of a native software here, and then HEC-RAS2D, which is a nationally, recognized software done by the HEC. I'd like to acknowledge Hari Raghavan and Hung Zhao, who's in this meeting right now, for their contributions to the presentation as well. So my challenge today is going to be keeping this very high level and not getting into the weeds too much. So hopefully I can do a good job at that. So just a quick slide, about our firm and some of the things that that are relevant to the needs that City of Tucson has. So right now we're doing an Pinal County drainage manual update. I know there's some modernization of the drainage manual that's happening in Tucson. Also Hari, who I mentioned on the previous slide, he was involved in creating the ADOT rational method tool. So I want to put that out there. And then also we're working with the City of Santa Fe right now on GSI policy and fee structure recommendations, and recognize you, Blue. We're going to have a interview pretty soon to talk about storm to shade. Yeah, so looking forward to that. And just a bunch of other project experience. I mean, don't need to go through too much. So purpose of this presentation, we're going to talk about, it's supposed to be an unbiased technical review of the software. It'll seem like as I'm going through it that I'm favoring HEC-RAS possibly, but that's not the case. It's going to be unbiased. The purpose of this presentation, right, is to provide background for a new FMP committee subtask group, as Elizabeth alluded to. Is going to be a subtask group dedicated to finding default parameters for 2D modeling and kind of providing a better, a more efficient track for review. So how I see the main goals of the subtask group are defining the default modeling inputs, documenting the best 2D H&H practices, refining the review processes, and then including them in an action plan as like another category. So we'll go through today and we'll talk about, the theory a little bit, like very, very little. I know you guys are like scared inside when you hear theory. I'm not going to go through it too much. And then we'll talk about, grid, mesh, topography, rainfall, infiltrations, all these modeling components. And then at the end, we'll go through how to interact with the modeling results, GIS capabilities, automation, and so on and so forth. Quick disclaimer, all the information presented are from user experiences and publicly available information. So that out there. Main thing to take away from this slide is that Flow2D solves the 1D momentum equation in 8 directions. HECRAS solves the 2D momentum equations. So Flow2D has one solver. It's just the full momentum solver. RAS2D has a bunch of different solvers. So, from a review perspective, you kind of have to understand a little bit like the difference between like diffusion wave, which is not momentum, and between, those ELM and EM. These two right here, like these are momentum. Usually you're going to see the ELM as it's like the faster momentum equation, but it's good to keep in mind that when you see a submittal with a lot of like bridges, structures, levees, that kind of thing, and it's using diffusion wave, you might want to take a second thought, like you might get different results with full momentum. So we'll touch on some of the things that we'll touch on in the subtask group, but some things to be aware of, like the capabilities here. Flow2D, you can see here, it's a structured square grid. There's no way to get around that. It's square, you just define the size. RAS2D has a mesh system, and it's got a grid and a subgrid, as we'll see an example of what that looks like and what that means in the next slide. So here, grid and topography are very closely related. If you were to cut a profile line through the topography in a Flow2D model, you'd see something like a stair step. So each grid has its own elevation. Whereas in RAS2D, as you can see, the video already played, that's cool. There's a subgrid. So even though you have the square mesh in RAS2D, in this case, the pixel size of the topography actually dictates the resolution of the results. So it's just you can see that there. So in Flow2D and HEC-RAS2D, obviously you have rainfall, you have static storms. So like a hypothetical storm, you can put in, the rainfall that you want, you can put in a temporal variation, you can specify an areal reduction factor, and you can also simulate a moving storm. So if you have a real storm data, like NextRad data, you could put that in using the rain cell option, and you can also simulate rain on buildings. In RAS2D, we'll just talk about version 6.x. Right now we're on 6.6, so kind of, 5 is still used sometimes, but let's talk about the more relevant ones. So it supports gridded data. So you can import like NOAA ASCII files. So that would account for your rain arc like you do in Flow2D. And you can have, spatial and temporal variation. So there's a lot of things that you can do with it that makes it very comparable to what Flow2D can do. And there's a bunch of available tools that you can use to like import DSS files and, do all the like, historical rainfall data manipulations that you need to get it into DSS format. For infiltration, both Flow2D and RAS2D have infiltration methods. I know here in Pima County, you use curve number a lot, so both Flow2D and RAS2D can accomplish that. They also have green and amped, which is more used in Maricopa County and Mojave County and other places. But the main takeaway here for infiltration is that Flow2D simulates infiltration at the soil layer. So after the rainfall hits the ground, then the computations start. RAS2D is different. RAS2D takes the infiltration out of the air. So it reduces the rainfall before it hits the ground. The main takeaway here is that there's such a thing called transmission losses. So as flow flows in a water course, there are losses that happen as the flow goes. That doesn't happen in RAS2D. So there's other workarounds, but we don't have enough time to talk about those things, but there are workarounds for that. Here, Flow2D and RAS2D can simulate, roughness, Manning-Zen, but RAS2D is just very straightforward. You just put a Manning-Zen layer down, and that's what it is. For Flow2D, it's a depth variable Manning-Zen. So when it's very shallow, the Manning-Zen is a lot higher. When it gets up, then the Manning-Zen changes, and it adjusts it. It tells you what it changed. Sometimes it changes them for you and tells what it is. So kind of more sophisticated Manning-Zen in Flow2D. I'm supposed to say Flow2D on the left there, but that's okay. So both Flow2D and RAS2D can do inflows. Basically, they work pretty similarly. The only major difference would be that Flow2D calculates the energy slope of the inflow coming in based on the topography, whereas you can manually override that or measure that in RAS2D. You can set it whatever you want it to be. And that becomes useful when you have multiple domains because momentum doesn't carry over to the downstream domain. So you could account for that in RAS2D a little bit by, increasing that energy slope. For outflows, it's kind of a similar case, like very, very similar between Flow2D and RAS2D. The main idea is that you want to make sure that your downstream boundary, your outflow, is far enough away from your area of interest that you're not going to have, upstream, you're not going to have impacts with accuracy from being too close to the downstream boundary. Because the main goal is just to get flow out of the model for the downstream boundaries. That's good modeling practice. Flow2D supports buildings via like the area reduction factor with reduction factor. So they have like a separate element. Flow2D is a bunch of text files. And so like each text file is an element of the model. So it's actually its own element. And you can, buildings are made impervious automatically. Rain on building is a switch that you can turn on and off. And it kind of looks like this. So it's like the different colors represent how blocked each grid is essentially. And then you have like the arrows for the velocity vectors and where the flow is going. So you can see that it does a good job of like blocking the flows. For RAS2D, there's a couple of methods to put in buildings. I'm just going to talk about one, and it's my favorite one because I don't like the Manning-Zen one. It's the terrain modification one. So you just burn buildings into the terrain. You just raise the terrain by 20 or 30 feet to simulate that blockage there. And you don't have to turn on rain on buildings on because there's no element for that. It's just rain is always on in RAS2D. So it works pretty well. The only thing is that, and this goes back to like the defaults, parameterization and best practices. There needs to be, like a land use impervious area on top of that. So there's a lot of switches that you can have. Impervious area in RAS2D is one thing that you can add. We'll talk about levees and walls real quick. And sorry if I'm moving super fast. I only have like 10 minutes to get through like a bunch of stuff. So hopefully I'm making good time. So Flow2D has a levee wall component. It's in the, it's its own text file as I alluded to previously, and it's in pink here. So it just blocks flows. You can block it in 8 directions, but essentially you'll sample it with a GIS file, and then it'll give you these, jagged lines here. In RAS2D, you have an option. You have 2 options here. You can model a levee as a 2D connection. So in that way, you can specify the profile you want. You can directly adjust like what the profile of that levee looks like. Or if you have good enough topographic data, you can cut a break line along the crest of the levee, and then that will simulate the levee as well. And then I think this is one of the last things we'll talk about, hydraulic structures. So Flow2D and RAS2D do have internal equations to calculate the results of hydraulics at culverts. They both do not require a 1D channel element in order to connect the inlet and outlet of the structure. You can use 2D components, floodplain components for that. The main difference is that in Flow2D, you can import a rating table from HYA or like HEC-RAD 1D and specify like the stage flow condition of the structure, whereas in RAS2D, you're kind of, it just gives you the generalized culvert equation approach. So, one thing to be aware of is to check the documentation of if they used a rating table. That'd be one of the things to check. Did they have those supporting models, right? Going back to the point of this presentation. And then for automation, in general, Flow2D is easier to automate just because it is a bunch of text files. So you can use Python or other things to easily, automate like the, results generation and like input and output, visualization, QC checks, and so on and so forth. In RAS2D, you can automate some things as well. But it's less needed because in HEC-RAS you do have all that functionality of being able to view the animations and whatever in RASMapper. But it's going to be more complicated to automate in RAS2D because it's not really simple text files. So you have like a bunch of other things that I won't get into. So for future releases, Flow2D is looking at using HDF5 rather than text files, which is just a more efficient file storage management. And pretty much GDS is totally obsolete by this point. So we're using the QJS plugin, but one of the future things they're looking at right now at Flow2D is having a post-processing of results directly in QJS plugin, and then adding some additional methodology for infiltration. There's quite a lot going on with RAS2D. It's got a lot of backing from a bunch of federal agencies. So they got funding, they got manpower behind it. So they're working on a lot of things like vertical Manning's end variation, storm drain, which have already come out, but buggy. So they're going to keep improving that, and then kind of putting the whole HEC-RAS into one interface. Because right now it's written in 4 programming languages. So it's got like, you have pop-out windows for the hydraulic editor and so on and so forth. They're looking at putting that all in one sort of Arc Pro type of, interface. And then, improvements to Bridge 2D, and then using the GPU and the CPU for processing power. So they're doing a lot of stuff over there. Very exciting things going on with RAS2D and Flow2D too. But so the final question, right? Like, which software do you use? I mean, this is more a question for like modelers, but it also could be a question for reviewers. Like, is this even the right software to use in this situation? Or are you using something that, is not giving you the best results, or the certain, if it's urban or if it's got storm drain or not, blah, blah, blah. So factors to consider, Flow2D is proprietary with a license fee. HEC-RAS is free. And at no cost, but they're both black boxes, right? Neither of them is open source. They can both do infiltration. They both have different capabilities with storm drain. Flow2D is a little bit more advanced with storm drain. They can both model large study areas. They can both have like culverts and bridges. You'll get different results with the different models if you set up the same area, but they can both do it. And then you need to look at, like, this is from a modeler perspective, like, what's your capability? If it's a huge model and you have Flow2D automation capabilities, maybe Flow2D is your choice, right? And then the level of support from software developers is one thing to consider as well. But I think in general, the whole industry is moving towards HEC-RAS 2D. That's kind of the thing. There's a vision to like set up these national models, or like models for like maybe the HUC or something like that. I'm not sure exactly what they're doing, but at some point in the future, let's say 10, 20 years, there might be a regional model that you just have to update. So there wouldn't even really be a need for Flow2D anymore because you have those models already there. So that's just something to think about. So hopefully you got something from this. Are there any questions? Okay, that's it. All right, thanks.
We're gonna quickly go through the next segment is emergency management update. We did get an overview from our emergency manager in the floodplain management plan meeting in June for the annual FMP. But for this meeting, essentially, I'd like to just say that we're gonna look at doing a flood and erosion hazard emergency response exercise. And we're looking at 2 options. One is a levee impacting a subdivision. Another is the Cherryfield basins. There's a dam aspect to those major basins that are upstream of the downtown area and residential area. And TUSD, the school, has expressed an interest in participating in an exercise, and maybe with the students, to do a scenario where those basins fail, and what happens with the school, and what happens with the residents downstream, and looking at how we do the warning system for that with the county. And so that's another scenario. So the subtask for that working group will be choosing the scenario and talking about how to set that up, and collaborating or setting up who would be collaborating on that. working with the emergency manager for the city of Tucson. There's various aspects of our emergency management plan. We're working toward getting our exercises annually. That's a requirement for obtaining PRS Activity 600 series, which we anticipate we will get that. And the city of Tucson adopted their emergency operation plan in October. And so I think we're gonna skip to the next aspect because we're running a little late. And that is reviewing the goal. Did everybody get a copy of the goal sheet? Okay. Did anybody get a copy of the goal?
What does it look like?
It's just one sheet and it says FMP goal is. Nope. Same sheet that. Yeah, but. Okay, that looks like it was one of the items that didn't get printed out. So what we're gonna do is take a look at page 60 in your FMP copies, and everybody get a copy. No, page 60. Okay, who needs copies? 60.
There's no page 60.
No, page 60.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
59.
It's, that's the PDF, so sorry. That does help you. Let's go find that page. Okay, go to page
53.
Find it,
53, I think.
53.
Action plan.
There it is. It is on page 53. It's looks like this. There's Poorman Road and Houghton Road. 53 is the bottom right. Got that page, everybody? Okay, so let's take a look at this. We've got the City of Tucson floodplain management plan's goal is to reduce flood and erosion hazards, damage, and associated costs. That's the overview concept. It's to reduce risk and reduce costs associated with those risks. And then below that, it goes into further describing what that entails. In the last FMP, I think it was the last one in 2020, we further updated this list of 5 items and clarified them. We had them in 2016, but in 2020, we clarified these 5 items. The handout that we had essentially said, please edit as you wish and turn it in, or check a box saying it looks good to me. And so let's just go through these, and if anybody has any suggestions on changing any of them, or if anybody says it looks good, that'd be, give us your feedback. Continue to identify high-risk areas. Of course, that's high risk is with regards to flood and erosion hazards. Continue to provide safe, efficient, and balanced conveyance of stormwater runoff. Continue to promote tree canopy, maintaining, enhancing, and restoring riparian ecosystems and wildlife corridors. 4, continue to increase community awareness of green infrastructure, water harvesting, and low-impact design methodologies, stormwater quality protection, floodplain preservation measures, and general flood and erosion information. Continue to expand incentives for private property owners and developers to implement sustainable flood and erosion hazard mitigation strategies. Does anybody want to suggest changes, or shall we take a vote and say, this looks good? Jen,
Just a wording thing, I would just lop off the continue to on all of those and just say identify, provide, promote.
I like that.
Agreed.
Is there any other comments? This was pretty much vetted pretty well in the last couple of FMPs, so didn't anticipate any changes, but Jen, that's an excellent comment. And I think if anybody has objections, we're gonna go ahead with making that correction and establishing that for the goal for this update. Does anybody have an objection to that? Hey, done. Okay, so then that was emergency management. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and look at the hazards and assessment of those hazards in our February FMP stakeholder meeting. We'd like all of you to attend that meeting. And or we can also have that, what we're anticipating is having the working groups. And then each of those working groups will need to go through each of those, and then we'll have to combine those comments and then update that for the following April meetings. So the idea is to have working groups work on that.
I have a general question, since I did participate in previous city FMPs. Your first goal is identify high-risk areas. Do you define high-risk areas just by the 100-year flood, or do you look at nuisance flooding, like 10-year flooding? Like, and I saw with your conveyance infrastructure, you talk about providing 100-year conveyance. So does the FMP look at just the 100-year, or does it also look at 10-year flood?
The FMP looks at everything. So our drainage manual refers to our 2-year or 10-year floods for assessment for development. So we got the 2-year, the 10-year, and the 100-year. And depending on the type of development, they may play a role. For instance, for road projects, the 10-year is more important than the 2-year, because we want the 10-year to be underneath pedestrian crossings if we physically do it. And of course, the 100-year is important. For critical facilities, that comes into play if you have a critical facility, water facility, or other types of critical infrastructure that may need to meet 500-year requirements per the ordinance. So it depends on what that particular issue is. So when we say high risk, it's kind of a general statement because it depends on what we're looking at. So the floodplain management develops the entire drainage manual and all of our floodplain ordinance and other drainage regulations. And so it depends on what that is. So I think the high risk area, I don't think we should try to describe that, because it's really case by case depending on the regulation that might apply. So we're also going to look at the action items. We anticipate we might look at doing the action items and the hazards together in February, and then look at the combined comments in April. Does anybody have any suggestions on how we might want to do that, or if you'd like to see us do the hazards and assessments in February and then the action items in April? Greg, do you have a thought on that?
The Pima County equivalent floodplain management plan draft was just published this morning. So our draft action plans would be also considered essentially by the board in March. So that's good timing. We have a lot of crossover activities.
We're gonna, our schedule is that we're gonna have these stakeholder meetings February and in April. Then we'll have another kind of a final floodplain management plan meeting in June. We're gonna do a lot more advertising to the public, more than the general advertising that we're doing. We're gonna include the newspaper, that kind of thing. And that June, meeting, hopefully we'll finalize the final draft. And in the summer, we're gonna move toward the mayor and council later in the later part of the summer. So that's our schedule. And I think what we're gonna do is include the hazards and assessments during the February and do the action items in April. So we have several sign-in sheets and your agenda has a list there. We've got that does not look like the small agenda. I think I printed out the wrong one. Okay, so this one is lacking some of them, but essentially we've got the GUI for the drainage manual, or rather modernizing the drainage manual. That's one sign-in sheet. What we'd like to see folks that are interested in those types of aspects of creating ways to make the drainage manual easier to use, sign up for that. Also, the next one is based on Ron's presentation about defining those parameters that the city of Tucson might look at for guidelines. That group will look at defining certain aspects. For instance, we'll say, and the minimum depth for a floodplain might be 0.2 feet. Craig, do you know if it's 0.25 or 0.2 at the county?
I'm sorry.
Or for mapping a floodplain, do you know what that minimum depth?
No, I'm a
Oh.
planner.
So, we're gonna look at defining some of these parameters, what the shapefile needs to show. Maybe the model might include more, but what for a submittal or a final set of floodplain limits, that would be based on a certain depth of flow for that particular floodplain that's being modeled. We also might say things like fat line floodplain limits shall be restricted to no more than 5% of the width of the floodplain or something. Looking at different ways we can ask that submittals be provided that provide more accuracy and consistency with the regulations. And so that subtask is called defining parameters, and it's TSMS subtask 5BII. The GUI is 5BI. That's called GUI creation. We also have a sign-up sheet here for retrofitting existing sanitary sewer lines. It doesn't look like we had the county wastewater, but we're intending to work with the county wastewater department in helping us set up some general guidelines on how we want to address that issue. Certainly, a breached sanitary line in the floodplain is a serious problem. And so making sure that doesn't happen is what we're looking at. We've worked over the last few years with the county. The county has done some retrofitting to some of these lines that are exposed in the floodplain. Perhaps they were built not deep enough below the scour depth. So those lines are exposed, and if something hard hits them, if they break open, we could have a serious hazardous condition, especially since our main watercourse areas have a lot more sandier soil where percolation is faster. We have regional watercourses where we got those hydrologic A group A, which are super sandy and percolable. The major watercourses also have those fast draining soils. So those are higher risk areas for contamination of groundwater. The retrofitting has been that we take an approach that the city floodplain administrator has required any concrete protection to be a colored concrete. This has been a common condition of the permit. We're thinking of establishing that as one of those guidelines or codes. So that's what this topic is, and that's called retrofitting existing sanitary sewer lines, TSMS subtask 5BIII, that's 8. We also have subtask 5BIB, that's number 4, human access controls. We certainly like to see HCD and Mari, some other folks involved with this particular working group. This group is going to look at ways we can reduce those risks to life and property in our water courses associated with encampment and other activity. This one's called human access control. This is that sign up sheet. What I'm going to do is go over a couple more subtasks. And we also have 2 other blank sign up sheets. And if we get a lot of people signing up on those, if somebody wants to suggest a certain subtask, we can have that sign up over there. But the other 2 are riparian floodplain corridors, maintaining, enhancing outreach for watercourses. In other words, MEOW. MEOW. That was funny. Okay. So this one is about outreach on trying to reach the public, explaining why natural floodplain function is so important. John Weiss, I'd like to have you involved with that one at least. And anybody else that's involved with maintaining and enhancing our floodplain corridors. That subtask is 5B, which is number 5. And then we also have the emergency response exercise subtask working group. If you'd like to sign up for that, you're welcome to sign up for more than one. And we won't have it on the same date, but we'll have these working groups in February. With these sign up sheets, you put your name, and at the very last column, there's a column where you can put availabilities. For instance, in February, if you're available Tuesday mornings, just put Tuesday mornings or something. And it says name, your agency and stakeholder type on the column here. And then your email address and phone number, and then your availability.
Elizabeth, is there a list of?
Questions?
Yeah, sorry. Is there a list of those groups online where, staff who know what they're talking about can sign up?
We can make these online and we'll put it on the floodplain administration website. Hopefully we can have that. We'll have it by next week. I'll email everybody that information as well.
Thank you.
So we've got the sign up sheets here and we're going to pass a couple down each row. And like I said, you're welcome to sign up for more than one. Or if you don't feel like participating in the working groups, that's fine. We do ask that if you could participate in one of these working groups, that way you can participate in those other items that we need to have completed assessing our hazards. Those are our 7 hazards that were identified in the original floodplain management plan. And we're going to talk about that more and assessing them, as well as the action items list. We do have that completed, but we don't have time to go over the action item list today. So we're gonna table that to the next meeting. So if you could participate in one of these stakeholder working group meetings, then that would help us because we're not just gonna be talking about those topics. We're also gonna be talking about the hazards and the hazard assessment in February. Is that clear? Okay, so I'm gonna hand off a couple more of these. Fine.